or if you have any audio issues, if you're not able to hear me properly, just please put that in the chat. And generally also like put down any kind of questions. Can't hear. That's odd. Ojas, are you able to hear me, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Wait, why are others not able to hear? That's weird. Okay, is anyone able to hear or not? No one is able to hear me. Okay, so Karthik, Shubham, I think it might be something on your end because it's working for a few others and definitely Ojas and me it's working. So just please take a look at your settings and such. All right. Give me 1 second. Okay, might be a settings issue or such. Cool. So yeah, we can just generally kickstart. I think while others are able to join in and such as well, audience will keep trickling in. So cool. So everyone, thank you for taking out the time. Today I'm hosting Ojas, who's currently working with Tencent. If you've never heard of that company, uh, I'm pretty sure you've played its game so far. So PUBG, probably the biggest sort of global phenomena at the moment, is you know uh, it's not the company that made the game, but it has publishing rights to it. So Ojas is right now working in Bangalore with PUBG, and he's helping them build an audience for this particular game and grow its audience as well. So yeah, I'll let Ojas quickly kind of introduce himself a little bit, give a little bit of a background, tell us how you got started, how last 10 years of your career has shaped up. Please just go ahead.
Sure. So thanks for hosting me, Mayank, and welcome to everyone. This is a great opportunity for me to interact with you as well, and for me to give some information about what we do, how you can get here. So I'm Ojas, and I lead the product team here for Tencent right now. I started my career in Deloitte in Etikani, which is a consulting firm, and studied in IIT Bombay, was doing aerospace engineering there before. Post that, after spending like close to 3 years in consulting, my passion is gaming, and at that time, gaming wasn't that big in India in terms of professional opportunities and other things. So I decided to explore that industry, and fortunately found a company called Kiwi, which made games for US market at that time. Kiwi was a Bangalore and San Francisco based company, and they were making Android games. This is back in 2012 when Android itself was new. So the opportunities were also not as many. But over time, as I started exploring this domain, like over time with Jungli and now Tencent, the gaming industry is growing quite well. And the opportunities are also multiple in the industry. So yeah, so most of my time after consulting was spent in broadly product management. And what I did essentially, for those of you who don't know, is that a product manager is a person who bridges the gap between several different teams and is kind of the owner of the product in terms of driving the metrics and making sure things are on track. So works with the development team, designer team, analytics team, and all the teams, and kind of make sure that the product is on track in terms of what we want to do and how to do it. So that's broadly what I've been doing. And currently at Tencent, I'm working on PUBG. I hope some of you have played it. If not, try it out. It's a good game. So yeah, so that's a bit about me.
Yeah, I'm sure pretty much. If not played, everybody has probably heard of that freaking game. It's like right now when I talk to students, half of them are like, I'm struggling with my studies. And I'm like, okay, how many hours are you spending in PUBG every day? Like, probably 4. So, partly you are supposed to
Yeah,
be blamed for people who are struggling with their studies. I'm going to blame you.
just to on that note, like please do spend only limited amount of time on things other than studies. Like be careful. Like if you want to ever work in the industry and find a good job and things like that, like focus on that aspect as well, and keep this for recreation. Like you will have time than that.
Yeah, yeah, perfectly. Responsibly, do everything responsibly, right? Like, it's good to play games.
Yeah,
Uh, I've been making games for the last 8 years, and everybody who's interacted with me knows I've been working with companies both in India and abroad, and uh, unfortunately, I don't get enough to play time to play games. I just make them. Whatever small time you get, you then get to cherish it. But yeah, all right, cool. So generally, all companies, irrespective of gaming companies, non-gaming companies that you've worked with in the last 10 years, you'd had the opportunity to hire a lot of engineers as well, right? Be on the other side of the hiring spectrum. So as a technical person, a person who started a career in a technical space, doing bachelor's from IIT, and then shifting into a non-technical space, you've had experiences with both kind of domains. So when you kind of interview engineers, right, like what are the kind of key things that you're looking at, be it whether you're hiring like senior engineers and maybe specifically focus on like engineers who are sort of younger and just starting their career.
sure. So hiring like for freshers most of the time is a lot to do with the person's aptitude, the person's enthusiasm and things like that. So I've hired people who are freshers. Helped hire people who are mid-level. I've helped hire people who are even senior level. It totally depends. I think for most people on this chat, maybe the junior level hiring is what I think they're looking for. So there, I think it depends a lot on the person's fit with the company, and maybe I'll go into more detail on that a little bit later. But just to set the ground rules, like it's a very competitive market out there and everyone's trying to do the best. So if you have a passion that you want to follow, or if you have a company that you want to target, the first thing I would say is to make sure that you're the best suit for them in terms of preparation, in terms of aptitude, in terms of doing the right things, in terms like in courses or other things, or even like things which help you in that front. For example, like from what I know about Outscale as well, like you guys have programs specifically for gaming, right? Like things like that really matter as well, because a simple thing like just like knowing what lingo to speak and how to solve a problem changes the velocity of what you can do, because you don't have to be taught like someone else who's new. So that's very important.
Okay, and specifically, sorry, specifically when we talk about just the technical skill set, for young engineers, are you like going very deep in terms of what their technical know-how is? Are you primarily looking at their past experience? When 10 pass outs from the same college apply at the same time for a same job opening, how do you normally go about filtering which ones are probably good ones to bring on board?
Sure. Sure. So, I mean, if we were to just simply start with the basic, like, let's take the first thing, like just getting the foot in the door, right? So, either it's your resume, your cover letter, um, or it's somebody you know who can good to put word for you so that you network and get that insight. So, the first step is always to find the companies, make a list, to find people who might be working there if you're off campus, and trying to find a few seniors or a few people you know who can introduce you to the company. If not, if you are on campus, then trying to make your resume the best and trying to do the right things which might be relevant for the company is the first step. Once a person has cleared that and is shortlisted, a lot of it has to do with preparation. I think preparation is very, very underrated by all of us. if you are well prepared for an interview, it can make a difference between a hire and a not hire if everything else is constant. Because what happens is that you only get that 30-minute or 1 hour slot with that company, and that's your one shot at it. And if you are somebody who's rambling, not able to communicate your ideas, not able to solve problems, it's very difficult for them to consider you for another round. So most of the time, I would say number one is just preparation. And any company, like I'm sure you guys can find online, like there are a lot of sources that you can find what kind of questions they ask, what kind of puzzles they ask, what kind of interview, other HR things they ask. And a well prepared candidate is like the first thing that I would say. The second would be like maybe something on terms of aptitude, like let's take an example. If you're hiring someone to build backend for something, then you would want to see what their data structures are like, what algorithms they know, and things like that. So having that aptitude, having the know-how, it's very important. Third thing I would say is enthusiasm and passion that you need. So since with a new hire, everyone expects that they will get some time to learn and to acclimatize and to grow in the company. Somebody who's very passionate really climbs like very quickly, and people like to look for those signals while they're interviewing them. Just as an example, if you are applying to Tencent, then we would definitely look if you're playing games, if you're playing PUBG, if you like playing other games, and ask you some questions on that front as well. So those are some of the things that we look for, or that any company looks for in freshers.
Yeah, I think the couple of key things that you mentioned that I definitely like a lot. Especially like networking. I think right, like the first one you
Yeah,
mentioned, networking. So that is something that I know pretty much everybody overlooks, and you'll be surprised how many people get hired just because somebody knew somebody who knows somebody, right? So if I know Ojas knows somebody else, and I know I'm hiring a technical person who just tells me, hey, this guy is rock solid, they'll just literally jump the line. Even if I have 200 resumes in my pipeline that I have to review, that person will directly jump the line to a head of the line just because you know somebody who knows somebody, right? And that's a very powerful indicator. And it's not like you're best friends for life, but you just need to network professionally and have start building your network, start attending events that might be happening around you and things like that. I think that's something that gets overlooked a lot, especially in India. And I don't know how I can emphasize more on that as well. So yeah, cool. So generally, like you've experienced both big companies, Tencent being huge, where you have thousands of people, versus your previous experience at Jungli, which is what 200 people, just under 200 people, right? So when you're hiring for these big ass companies, and then on the other end you're hiring for companies that are mid-size, and then maybe even talk a little bit about startup, right? Like typically out of the three things, um, are there criteria that you evaluate candidates on? Like, so would one person be a good fit for a startup, whereas might not be a good fit for a bigger company, and things like that, right? Like, how would you your hiring process change when it comes to finding technical folks that work well in a bigger company versus in a smaller company?
sure, sure. So I'll maybe give two perspectives, like because a lot of people might also have the question on which type of company they want to go into. So for example, like let's take a startup as an example. Like startups are like young companies where most of the times velocity is everything. Like they just want to go quickly, grow fast, do things that break almost to some extent. So in a company like that, the people that will fit well and the kind of people they're looking for are people who can just take on problems and challenges and solve them with ingenious methods really. So what that means is that, for example, some amount of just trying to get things done attitude is a big plus, because you may not have the perfect time, you may not have the perfect team, you may not have the perfect code, but shipping something out is much more important than trying to perfect it. So that's startups. Like it's a very like quick paced environment where people are always trying to find ways and hacks to just go ahead. So for a mid-sized company like Jungly or like Daily Hunt or some of the other companies that I've worked for, there it's, I would say, more of a balance, like depending on which project, because mostly it's like not like 5, 10 people or 20 people, it's a bigger team. So depending on which project, you could be in a new initiatives team where again you're in a startup and you're trying to do new things, or you could be in something that's more in a like developed scaled mode where you're trying to grow to the next level, maybe x to 10x. So depending on which side of the team or which side you're inclined to, the company might look for very different things. Startups I've kind of already covered. For something that's going from x to 10x, you need to know about scale, and you need to not just know scale theoretically, but take it from that x to 2x to 3x to. And what that usually means is that you know what configurations to do, you know how much servers to add, you have done those things before, which will not be something you're newly discovering. So some amount of already have experience is what they look for. If they are hiring for freshers, they look for people who can quickly have these skills developed, so who can take on new problems and who can work with the team, who can communicate well, and get those problems solved. For a large company like maybe Tencent or even Google or Facebook, they have a very different approach for what they're looking for and the kind of people they hire. For those companies, most of the time they look for very structured and very solid uh, theory and fundamentals for the people. I'm not saying the others don't look for, but their focus is much more on that, because most of the time the problems you'll be solving there are already at scale, which means if you make a mistake or if you have something wrong, then the impact is very big, and company stands to lose a lot of credibility and money. So there you would be expected to be a very learning oriented person who goes deep into something, and maybe they will ask you a lot of questions on something you've done in the past, some project that you've completed or some course that you've taken, and you are expected to really know inside out of things, and answer all the questions. So it's kind of different. I would say most of the difference is in temperament, but sometimes even hiring is different.
Okay. Yeah, I think those are very key important things that you highlighted. But if now knowing all that stuff, if I am an engineer, right, like I just graduated and now I'm thinking about, hey, should I focus on, working with a startup, or should I look for a mid-sized company versus even a very big company like Google, Facebook kind of thing, right? Tens of thousands of employees. Um, are there like certain key questions that I should be probably asking myself? Um, in terms of, hey, which path is like the right path for me if I want to kickstart my career, right? Like how would I know without working at any of these companies that okay, maybe I'm a kind of a person that is going towards the startup career is probably a better path for me. Like how do I evaluate versus should I focus purely on building my profile so that I get accepted into Google, Microsoft, Oracle, Yahoo, kind of huge ass companies, right? Like, what are these key questions that I should probably be asking myself to figure out which is the right direction for me?
Sure. So, in my opinion, that's a very personal decision. And why I say that is, let's take an example. Like for me, it was gaming that I was very passionate about. So a lot of times, decisions or early stage thoughts in my mind were oriented towards that. There were not many opportunities at that time, so hence I decided to do other things. So that's one approach where you have a passion maybe in some industry or some domain. It could be maybe even something like I'm very interested in ML or AI, or it's something like, okay, I really want to work for a company that does local things like Swiggy or Ola. So it really depends on that kind of like passion. If you have that, then your life is much easier actually, because there are only a limited companies or known companies in that domain, and you can actually make a list and try to figure out how you can get into them. The second is like, uh, what really drives you? Is it, for example, some people thrive on just the impact, like they would want to be part of a company that has a big impact. And what that means is, for example, working for a startup that's in too early stage may not be something that you would thrive on, because they're just trying to create that market as of now. Whereas something like Google or Microsoft or even Tencent, if you go and work on a project there, when the project goes live, when the servers get switched on, the kind of impact that you will make is incredible. So, so if you are that kind of person, then you look for companies that are big, that are and innovative at the same time, so that are trying to do interesting things at scale. And the third category is, if you are a person who's very interested in trying to do new things, trying to make sure that uh, you learn something new or you contribute to something new, then startups is a great place for you, because startups pivot so often. Startups, there are so many different projects that you will work on, so many different features that you will work on, that you will definitely see a lot of new things every single day. So those, I think, are the way that you should probably think about it, and then approach and build your resume or your application in that direction.
I think one thing I'll add to that in my from my personal hiring experience has been
Sure.
where if I'm an engineer, like what do I want to do? Do I want to spend potentially 7 days working for the first 2 to 3 years of my career and learn as much shit as possible in the real world, or am I the kind of person who wants to work Monday to Friday, chill out with my friends over Saturday, and just watch Netflix on a Sunday, right? Right. If I'm on the second category of people, then probably a startup environment might not be a good fit for you, right? Versus and being honest with yourself as to what kind of a career you want, at least in the first 3 to 4 years of your, when your career is just starting, that can actually make a huge impact in terms of how your career direction goes, right? In a startup environment you'll get to learn a lot, right? Like you'll get to learn a lot more different kind of things, where in a bigger company you might be just focusing on one specific thing, right? So it being honest with yourself as to, hey, can I push myself for 7 days a week non-stop for the next 24 months, even though the reward for it could be a huge amount of learning, right? I'm not saying learning doesn't happen in companies like Google and Facebook, but then you're protected. You're well protected from the outside world. You have a big team around you, and even if you fuck up, they'll cover for you. They have systems in place and all, right? But when you fuck up in a startup, right, the shit hits the fan real fast, right? There's real consequences for that. So if you are somebody who can take that responsibility and want to take that responsibility, then I would recommend that working in a startup is going to be a much better rewarding experience, because you'll get to see a bigger picture beyond than what just a software engineer does, right? Beyond, you might even end up career trajectory like Ojas, right? Like after doing tech, doing engineering for a while, and then maybe you figure out, hey, product building products is something that's exciting for me. So 5 years down the line, I'm not even doing technology anymore. I'm doing building tech products for bigger companies and such, right? So generally the like your traction can change based on how you, and to be honest, just be honest with yourself as to what kind of a career you want, right? Because working in a startup versus working in a bigger companies are two completely very different things, right? Okay, cool. So I think this is sort of like a controversial question, the next one. And I'm pretty strong believer on this is basically okay. So the question is, what is the real value of education today, or rather a degree today, right? And I have very strong views on this one. We have students from every corner of the country, from north, south, the far east, from Silchar, Assam, and whatnot, and they're all learning the same things, which ideally their college should have taught them, right? Their college was 4 years, and still we have engineers who are struggling to get good job opportunities because their college never really gave them the skills. So my question is, like, do you see colleges playing a big role in education going forward, or do you see a path where in the next 10 to 20 years colleges would become completely obsolete, and and generally just your views on where this is heading?
Sure. So, I think like let's flip it and look at from the company's perspective, or from the perspective of if you want to make it through to this kind of a role or this job, then what do you need for that, right? Because then it doesn't matter what you did before that, and that's the abstracted level where you whether you have done a college degree or not, whether it's in the domain or not, uh, matters or not, we can answer that way. So like for example, like even my degree is not really either in computer science or in anything relevant, to be honest. Like aerospace engineering is very far away from what I'm doing as of now or what I've done in the past. So to some extent, like what and where does not matter. I believe that what matters is that how good you are. But this makes the thing slightly difficult if we go back to the company side of things, because if you think from the company standpoint, suppose you open up one job description or you want to hire one person. If you are a big company or if you are a company that's doing well, you get like hundreds and thousands of applications. So how do you select that one person, or 10 people or 50 or 100 people to interview? There it becomes very challenging if you don't have something good to show. And what I mean by that is, let's take an example of Swiggy. If Swiggy is hiring freshers and they are looking just to hire for maybe one position, then they would have some filters to reduce the number of people who can make it to the next round. And are those filters purely based on college qualifications, purely based on how well you've done? As of now, a lot of times they are. The reason is because there is not an equivalent of, okay, maybe backend engineering for localized apps. That that course or that kind of program doesn't exist. So that's why the companies are falling on to just the regular, like which college, what grades, what the projects they've done, to get the first level of shortlist. And I think that will only change once there is an alternate parallel system which offers these courses, just like Outscale does, or there are other companies which are trying to build a similar system. If there are well developed and accredited courses, then they can substitute the traditional ones. But till that happen, I do see colleges playing a role, just to get the foot in the door. After that, it's totally dependent on the person, on the performance, on their passion.
Hmm. Okay, yeah, I mean that's fair because like you said, like us being a startup, I opened a marketing kind of a position and we got 250 applications within one day. Like one
Yeah.
day for one position that I was hiring, we got 250 applications, and we are a small startup, right? Like
Yeah.
not many people know about us, right? And you can imagine the problem that, companies like Google, Swiggy, Paytm would face if they open a position for one specific role and suddenly they're flooded with resumes. So I do agree that yes, that acts as a good sort of a filtration criteria, where if you have a college stamp that, hey, I graduated from the top 10 colleges in the country, then naturally you're ahead of the list, right? But I think overall the pattern is changing, because from what I have seen, being on both the hiring sides and on the interviewing side as well, over the course of the years, generally companies are moving away from that filtration criteria. Reason being, they know that they are getting not good candidates in the long run from top colleges, and generally somebody from a lower end college or a college who have never heard of doesn't necessarily mean that they are outright bad, right?
Yeah.
Then you usually end up into this manual filtration process, which goes beyond just scanning for keywords, right? Like if you have good projects listed on your resume, if you have relevant work. So if a company is hiring for web development, then you have web development kind of projects and technologies listed on your resume. That will let you bypass a lot of those automatic filtrations as well, right? So that kind of happens at like a lot of bigger companies. But even then after that as well, like even if you might have graduated from IIT for all I care, but if you're nothing but puff inside, then you'll get kicked out in the second round. All you did was waste 1 hour of your time and somebody else's time, right? So it doesn't really matter as much as but I think overall, yes, the pattern is changing, and like you said, right, like companies like us are now trying to bring that standardization, where we say that, hey, if our engineers are graduating and we are putting them in front of companies, then there is a certain level of expectation when it comes to quality, right? Like, okay, this engineer is a certified web developer. These are definitely the things that they know, right? These are the definitely things that they can perform, and they can hit the ground running from day one, and not have to be, pampered for 6 months of training before as well. So yeah. Okay, cool. So nowadays there's oh, by the way, guys, so please put your questions in the chat. We'll take them up after this one. I think this is the last question that I want to cover. So after that, we'll just open it up for Q&A as well. So generally now there is a lot of sort of hype around distributed teams, remote culture, and could you just share your thoughts around what that is? Have you seen it work? And also just give us a quick overview of what this means for, because I know a lot of students still aren't very much familiar with the whole thing. So yeah, just give us your sort of take on, does it work? Does it not work? Things to watch out for, etc.
Sure. So I mean, just to start off, like even something like what we are doing right now is distributed, right? In a way that none of us are at the same location, and we are still able to do this dialogue. So I think definitely there are a lot of big positives in distributed work. Uh, it doesn't work for all companies, because in some companies, just having physical presence, being able to talk to somebody right next to you, leveraging your network, that is the way to go. And those companies will never be able to do distributed or remote work. But there are a lot of companies like which have now started embracing this, and the reason is because talent is like not present at one place, and especially if you are trying to look for talent in one place, then you will pay a lot more premium, because everyone is there as well, and everyone is trying to get them on their payroll. So I think in the future, yes, there will be a lot of companies that will adopt this way of working more and more, especially with the technology helping us overcome all the communication gaps. But the major thing that I feel for this to work, the person or the team has to be excellent at communication, like really above par. Because if the communication breaks down, then there is no way to fix it. In other cases, like you have somebody who will just pull the team together and try to fix the issue. But here it's very difficult. The second thing I would say is like structure and the way of working. Like if uh, if there is a problem presented to the team, if the team is able to break them down into chunks and then send it to people or send it to a part of the team and then they work and deliver, then it can be all put back together and it works well. But if it's not, if there is no structure, if there's no planning, then it's just simply everyone is working on something on their own. And the third point I feel is ownership. Like remote work requires people who take ownership very, very seriously. Like if you say I will do this, if you commit to giving an output, if you commit to send that code out, if you commit to publish, and if that doesn't happen, someone else is losing their sleep, and that way the company can never succeed, it can never function. So I think definitely these three things would be would be key, in my opinion, for people to have that kind of a culture.
No, yeah, definitely. I think you hit the nail on the head as well, right? Like it's much harder to do
Yeah,
remote work. It's much harder to implement those kind of things at a company level and also hire engineers and trust them that, when they're saying they're working, they're actually working and not watching Netflix, right?
yeah,
Because, we don't know what somebody sitting in far corner of the world is working on. But of course, it gives them a lot more flexibility that they can stay close to the family. They don't have to
yeah,
relocate. They can have a better work-life balance. So it comes with a lot
yeah,
of good things, but there is a lot of harder things. But I think there are a couple of companies now, big companies, right? 200 people company, especially in US, where they hardly have 10 to 15 people in US, and rest are
yeah,
distributed across everywhere in the world, from Africa to India to Asia. Uh, you
yeah,
know, so imagine, you're working for a company in New York, but then you're sitting on
yeah,
a beach in Bali sipping peanut coladas and the
yeah,
living the engineer dream, right? Working from a beach
yeah,
in Bali on your MacBook, but so it's much harder to do. But I think that's the way forward. In some shape or form, a lot of companies are adopting this distributed culture. So and I think that's not just a thing uh, with specifically international, but even in India as well, right? Like I know a lot of our friends who have graduated at the same time and now running their own companies are looking at building teams in multiple locations in India as well, right? Like, startups that are based in Bangalore are now looking to hire teams in Ahmedabad, in Nagpur, where there is good talent, but there isn't any enough companies to hire them, right? Because they get good companies to work with them as well. So yeah, cool. So I think that's all the questions generally. But any general thing from your side before we jump into doing some kind of Q&A with the audience as well?
sure. So I think in general, like one thing that I would just like to tell people is that compared to what we had a decade back, opportunities in India have grown like crazy. So if you have a passion or if you have some inclination towards doing something, there is a company out there that's doing that thing, and maybe you want to work there. So do a lot of research and think a lot of times what do you really want to do in life when you're passing out of college. And the second thing that I would like to say is like a lot of people are also experimenting, starting up on their own, or joining very, very early stage startups. If you are a person who really thrives in an environment which is really fast paced, then you should also consider that option. Like the startup economy is growing quite well, and you guys can be a part of that as soon as you want to.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I think if you guys have a thing in mind, then always, just give it a shot, right? Because it's always, when you look back on those years, and it's always good to say, oh, okay, I tried, but I failed, versus saying, hey, I didn't even try, right? Um, I know it sounds cheesy and motivational, but that's actually the reality of it, right? So, cool.
Yeah.
All right, so let's just quickly pick up some questions from the chat. I'm just going to go slightly in a reverse order because I'm not sure how many questions we have. Um, VR virtual audience. So, being a computer science engineer, what will be your advice or preparation for interviews? Okay, so good question. I think a third, it purely depends on, again, going back to some of the earlier discussions we had, right? It purely depends on what kind of company you are kind of looking to apply for, right? Right. So if your only focus is Google and Facebook, and these bigger giants, Microsoft and such, then just purely do data structures and algorithm. Don't do anything else, right? Forget about web development, forget about game development, and that's an honest advice that I give to every student, right? They only care about your data structures and those kind of basic fundamental skills. But remember that if you're passionate about web development or any specific AI, IoT, anything specific, and you know that's what you want to do, then do not go for any of these bigger companies. Because what happens is when you enter one of these bigger companies, you get into this pool of general software engineers, right? And once you finish your onboarding, which takes about 1 to 2 months, and you're through their training processes, etc., right? After that, whichever team needs you, you'll get put there, right? So even if you are really passionate about working on Android, there is a chance that you might end up doing something on server technology or something, right? Because they're so big, you'll not get too much control, at least not early on, right? So understand that going for a bigger company, you will always have that trade-off, and also that the chances that out of every 10,000 people that probably apply to Google, maybe one gets selected, right? If not even lower than that. So there are always those kind of trade-offs to think about. But if you're going for something mid-size or startups, then focus on specific things, right? Like if you know web development is the thing you want to do, start building projects in that, right? If you want to do something in AI, data sciences, start building projects in that, because a lot of these mid-size and small companies are looking for people who are more hands-on, who already know the ABC of things, and we don't need to spoon feed you every time that you come on board, right? Because smaller companies don't have the budgets to keep you around for 6 months and train you and spoon feed you, right? So from a company's perspective, if you understand that, then you will be best prepared. Shubham is asking, what is the scope for indie game developers? You want to take that one?
Sure. So, I think it's a very upcoming industry in India, at least. Like we have seen a lot of indie developers. Like even the Ludo game that's on top. At one point in time, they were an indie developer who was just struggling to make ends meet. But now they are one of the top uh, downloaded games in India ever. So if you are passionate about like gaming, there is scope. But the only like challenge with this industry is that just like entertainment industry in general, it's a like hit driven business, which means that you cannot bet on just one game and hope that it will work. So which implies that you will have to try maybe 5 or 10 games for one of them to click. So there is a lot of scope, but the caveat is that you need to have some sort of financial backing, either from traditional investment terms or on your own, or some way of for you to make sure that you have that bandwidth to make those 10 games at the least.
Yeah, and I'll add to that is, like, I don't know if most of you guys might know, but I actually did a little bit of indie development for about a year and a half or so. So like Ojas said, right, like you need to make sure that your financials are covered. You know how to, don't think that I'm going to start working on a small indie project. I'll be able to make the game in 2 weeks because I am a fucking rock solid developer. And, at the end of the month, ads will start paying for my electricity bill and food, right? That's not going to happen, right? So make sure that at least for a couple of years, you have your finances covered, and assume you're not going to make any money if that's a direction that you really want to seriously pursue, because it will take you at least, you know 10 to 15 games to figure out what's working. And the other thing I would recommend is that start hunting down producers. So a lot of smaller studios always need a producer to back them up. So, Budo, Ketchup, these are some of the blind studios, are some of the popular names, but there are a lot of smaller publishers and producers that will fund your game as well, right? So, but most of them need you to prove that your game is good. So they'll take your game on a trial basis, launch it, run it for a week, and see what the numbers are, right? So those kind of things are something that you need to worry about. So yeah, look into first finding a publisher before you commit to doing an indie. And the moment you have a game ready, start pumping it out to these publishers. See if you can crack a deal with somebody. Because even if you have a rock solid game, you cannot get it in front of 10,000 people. You're not gonna make a single penny. So so make sure your shit is down in terms of you're handling both the business side of things and not just a game. If you're just a game developer, you want to do this solo, I would say just forget about it. You can do it as a weekend side hobby project on Saturdays and Sunday, but still have Monday to Friday something that pays the bill. Um, but yeah, I mean, if finances are taken care of, then yeah, sure, go for it, knock yourself out. Kushbu is asking, are AR games a good thing to think of? Mm, what do you think?
I just want to clarify that you mean like from a development standpoint, or you mean like just from an industry standpoint? Like, is it about the question about making AR games?
I think
Uh,
let's take it from an industry perspective, right? Like I'm assuming that anybody who's decent at building games, they'll be able to figure out how to make an AR game, right?
Sure. So I think the AR games, like especially with the Pokemon game that was there, like the that game actually has shown that there is potential because from what I remember, it was top grossing for a lot of time, and they did make a ton of money on the game as well. And they've come with another game after that for Harry Potter's Unite or something like that, which also is breaking the charts and doing well. So, from an industry standpoint, I think there is a lot of scope. What seems to be working right now is an IP-based game with some AR element because the AR element itself is not able to sustain the game, and the IP and the kind of storyline it brings with is making the game sustain. So that's an interesting take that the industry is going for. But I think in the future, especially if I go broader and look at VR as well, then there is a lot of scope and a lot of people are experimenting in that direction. And I see like maybe 2 3 years or 5 years in the time these games might become like big as well. So yes, it's doing great for now, and I think there's a lot of scope.
Okay, so I'll give a slightly contradictory view on it. And I'm not going to just focus on AR, but generally across the board, AR, MR, XR, VR, bullshit R. There's so many R's now. I keep forgetting how many R's are there. So, like typically, if you look at the trend right now, the specific verticals inside the industry that have adopted these are non-gaming. So there are a lot of use cases. I know a company in Europe who has approached me for hiring game developers, and they are building training for firefighters, for police in a European country using AR and VR. Right. So there are a lot of these kind of use cases which companies are using right now, which are not at all games. So AR, VR, MR, those kind of things are generally picking up momentum in non-gaming domain. So if you're passionate about building things in AR and VR, I would say look into the direction of tools for other industries. There's a lot of AR happening in marketing, right? So a lot of companies are building platforms that will let you create AR-based ads for marketing, right? So you can try on a Nike shoe just sitting at your home and look at how it feels on your foot or how it looks on your foot, right? Things like that. So a lot of those kind of cases are helping, other industries. It hasn't really picked up, and I think part of it is just because of the cost, not for AR, but the other factors like MR and VR. The cost of hardware is so high as of now that it hasn't really picked up yet. So of course, like Ojas said, right, like down the road, it will build momentum, and I think as an as the technology improves and the cost of hardware comes down, generally, yes, things will start becoming better. Hope that answers that question a little bit. Gaurav is asking, many of the startups don't grow or fail in their business. Why? Okay. uh, yeah, it's a very, you won't probably see, I think he privately messaged me.
Okay,
It's not
got
in
it.
the general chat. Um,
Yep.
but I think it's a very broad question. There's there's a very common saying, Gaurav, in the startup world, that whatever you think can go wrong will go wrong. So there are 1,000 things that go wrong every day, and there isn't one that says that, hey, this is the core reason that why all startups fail. Because if we know that core reason, then it's easy to fix it, right? Then we know the problem. So then naturally all startups will stop failing. So every startup is unique. Every startup has its own challenges depending on the domain they're in. We are in education, we have our own challenge. Amazon and Flipkart are in e-commerce, they have their own challenge. Netflix is in, entertainment. Companies like Tencent are in pretty much everything, so they have their own challenges. But yeah, so it's hard to kind of justify any specific answer to that question. But yeah, anything you would like to add on this to that?
Uh, I think it's just the nature. Like startups, by definition, are trying to do something that's not really done. So sometimes the problems are, like most of the times, rather, the problems are unknown. Like what you're dealing with, what will come on the way,
Hmm.
is not known. So it's very hard. It's like assume that we didn't have an education system, and then when you're 18, you're just supposed to start work. You have no idea what to do, how to do. You have not learned math. So people who start startups, like it takes a certain amount of skill, like and aptitude to really make it work. And a lot of times it's also the industry that has to turn around for them to work. So there are so many factors that can go right or wrong for you, that it's tough. Um, so yeah, so that way it's a tough thing. But on the flip side, like if you start up on your own, and if that works, then the financial benefits, the other benefits that you get from it will be disproportionate, and hence justify you doing that. So it's like a, what do you really want? Do you want a stable work life and stable pay, or are you okay with ups and downs but getting a big reward possibility in the end? That's the way I see that.
Yeah, I think that's very valid as well, right? Because it's just about, can I take a risk on something, right? So I'll give you a valid example. Right now, we started Outscale last year, and now we are doing something where we are teaching people without charging them anything, right? Like a Fitji or an Akash or any of these traditional institutes can't even imagine doing something like that, right? Where they're giving something of value of more than 2 lakhs to a student, I don't know, and just taking, their word for it that, hey, okay, this student will return us the money, hopefully in the future, right? So we are taking that huge risk. And imagine, like our current batch of web developers, suddenly everybody disappears after we get them a job. They stop responding, they don't take our phone calls, they're not pay us money, and what do we have to do, right? Like we'll die, right? We won't be able to live if everybody defaults. So that's that's some of those kind of things can happen as well, where like, will, if you go to your college and you say that, hey, college, let me study for free for 1 year and I'll pay you once you get me a good job, right? Will your college do that? Probably no, right? So because they're not institutions that are built for taking up risk. So generally, I think, overall, the whole idea is that if you have the appetite for taking risk, risk will come with a bigger reward as well, but it comes with a bigger risk for failure as well, right? So sometimes the failure can be something based on what you did within the company, and things that you can improve, or others. Other things could be things beyond your control. The market was not ready, and things like that, right? AR VR is another example. If you build an awesome game right now, but it does not have an intellectual property like Harry Potter or things like that, chances of that game succeeding are very low, right? Even though you might have built an awesome game and it's completely bug free and works like fucking awesome, it probably not work, right? It's not going to build tens of millions of audience within a month in order to make the money back, right? So those kind of things can happen as well. um I'm still sure whether to ready or not. Okay, yeah. So that's AR/VR discussion. Google Indie Accelerator. Shubham is asking. I'm not sure if that's a question for us, Shubham. If there is, just please put a question, like a full question, so I understand what you're asking. Is there a pay? And of course, I'm not sure if future startups. So I'm sure pretty interesting. The pay. Actually, the problem while going with the startup is the pay, and of course, you are not sure of the future of that startup. So it comes down to choosing between interest and the pay. Okay, so Atharv is asking whether if I choose a startup, then the question is, right, will they be able to pay me as well, right? Um, and the other thing is like, whether I'm going to be doing something interesting. So should I, weigh like something that gives me good pay versus something that gives me good interest, right? Like, how do you kind of balance those things out?
Sure. So I think like fortunately we have so many startups and the funding environment is so good now that not everyone is struggling to pay their employees. So most startups like Ola is also a startup, right? But they are so big and so well funded that questions like this are not really an issue for them. So it depends on which, like if you join a very, very early stage startup, like do ask them what kind of funding they have. And that's a question that you should feel free asking, whether you're a fresher, whether you are a senior level person, whatever level. And because it's important, like the founder or the team should be able to answer that. And if they have good funding, or if they are in the process of getting funding, or if they have business that is generating cash, then you're safe. Then your performance is what will dictate whether you stay in the company or not, rather than the company itself shutting down. So I don't think it's as risky as earlier. Like maybe I'm talking about like 10 years or 5 years ago. So that way, it's at a stage where you should be able to find one company or a few companies that are doing a startup or an early stage thing that you're interested in, and they will be able to pay you as well. Uh, whether it will be the best in the market salary, that for sure may not happen. Like it's not going to be that you'll get like top notch salary as well while you're building something cool. That question you will still have to answer for yourself. Like, am I okay with 30% less pay than what this company is offering, but I get to do like a lot more cooler things. So I think that's how I look at that.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid point as well. And now, like Ojas said, um, a lot of companies are getting funded. There's a lot of investors in the market as well. So generally, don't be afraid to ask these kind of questions regarding job security and financials. So when a startup offers you a job opportunity, you know, ask that, hey, are you guys funded? How do you think you'll be able to pay me for the next 12 months? It doesn't matter what your pay scale is, what the offer is, that irrespective of that, you should be open to asking these kind of questions. And if the other person is not comfortable answering these kind of questions, that kind of give you a hint about what kind of a company they're building. They're not building a company that's transparent, right? They don't share information openly with their teammates. So that might be another thing to think about, that do I even want to work with this team, right? Should I look for other opportunities and such as well? So if they want to bring you on board and are offering you a job offer, then they should be happy to disclose that, hey, we have already closed a funding round. We have funding for the next 2-3 years. They should be able to, they might not be able to declare you all the numbers, but they should be able to share this kind of basic information that gives you a sense of how, if they're self-funded, then how is that happening? How long will they remain self-funded for? What's the future plan of hiring? Things like that, right? So generally, you should have that sort of an open conversation with the founder, with whoever is your hiring manager, right? and get to know the company before you make a decision as well, right? So those kind of things are important as well. Cool. Hopefully that answers your question. Industry mixed reality. So there's some super hard red ribbon stuff. I'm not sure what. And then you're giving some references of Magic Leap. What's the Magic Leap thing?
Just like that. It's just something that people can explore if they've not seen.
Okay, so
Yeah.
side caveat, I have a lot of friends who work in Magic Leap, and they are now lead engineers. So the previous batch that graduated for game developers, right? One of their engineering lead did mock interviews for the students last time. So he's from
Nice.
my batchmate from Carnegie Mellon, and now he's leading an engineering team there. So
Nice.
I think half of their companies, I know half of their company. It's a big fucking company. So yeah, but again, a pretty bullshit company. So yeah, I could that I think of for augmented faces, exploring a lot of options. Okay, so generally, any don't see any more questions. Any closing thoughts? I think we might be running out of questions as well. But if you guys have any questions, just please put them now in the chat. Otherwise, we'll wrap it up. Meanwhile, or just any other general thoughts around overall things we have discussed.
No, I think I'm good. Just maybe one last point I wanted to make was around just being structured. Like this, I missed in the previous question. So essentially, like when you're trying to answer any question or when you're trying to solve any problem, like try to be as structured as possible, and that means like you should spend time thinking about what your answer will be, what your thoughts will be, what your solution will be. So, and that helps a lot in the early stage of the career as well, because people really appreciate you having thought and gone the extra mile. So that
Yeah,
was one
definitely.
thing I missed. Yeah.
Definitely, I think. Okay, so one last question I think we can take is game developers are most overworked and underpaid. Is that true? What do you think?
Uh, Not really, because in general depends on which company you are working for. A lot of companies have a lot of demands from people because they are on the path that's really fast, and you can look up like companies like Netflix or other companies where they call themselves a sports team. Like it's essentially if you're not doing your best, then we can get someone else, just like how you would do in a cricket team. Like if you're not doing, doesn't matter how much effort you're putting in, or if you're not putting in enough effort, then we'll get someone else. So I think there are a lot of companies that follow that process. I do think that it's a lot of negative news as well. It's not always true. Some companies yes, and some places yes, but that's true in general as well. In terms of underpaid, I don't think that is true as well. Like in fact, if you are in a company that's made a very successful game, like you can be very sure to reap substantial rewards. If the company is well managed, you will definitely get those rewards that are associated with the game and with the success of that game. So it's a more of a perception thing, and I'm not sure if in general, like startups or big companies versus game development companies are any different, in my opinion.
Hmm. Yeah, I think one thing I'll just add there quickly is like it's more like a 80s thing that has been thrown around in the industry in the news a lot. Bigger companies like EA used to exploit a lot of workers back in the day, 20 years back and such, right? So that was normally a thing, but now I think generally that pattern has changed because a lot of the companies are moving to shorter development cycles. Projects are launching much faster, and like nobody really launches any games on CDs anymore, right? So it's not like you launch and you're done because your CD is out in the market, but now you're sending out updates every other day, right? So there's always work ongoing, irrespective of which development cycle phase you're in, whether you're post-launch, whether you're pre-launch, whether you are in just prototype phase, right? Whatever it might be. So in that case, companies always need good developers, and as long as you are valuable to the company, they'll respect you as well. And use your best judgment. If you feel like you're underpaid and you're overworked, have that honest conversation with your manager, uh, even your manager's manager. And if nobody is valuing your input, maybe it's time to move on, right? Maybe it's time to call it quits and find some other opportunity where your work and your talent gets valued as well, right? So there are ample companies in the market. Remember, right? Like people usually come to me and say, right, hey, I'm not finding any opportunities. And then they have not even looked at the most obvious places such as LinkedIn and Angel List, where there are job postings for free that they can search and apply, right? So make sure you're doing in your effort as well to figure out what might be a better opportunity for you. If the current one does not seem like a good one, put in the effort to figure out that as well. Okay, I've heard AAA game companies prefer Unreal over Unity. Okay, so question of Unity versus Unreal. I think this is an age-old question. Which game engine to prefer? Do you have generally any thoughts on those?
It's very subjective, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think it purely depends. Like generally, that's what I usually say to all the game developers that are joining our batches, that hey, we are training you to become a game developer, not a Unity developer or an Unreal developer, right? So tomorrow if I throw you into an HTML world, and ask you to make web games, you should be able to, using the same knowledge you have for game development in Unity, right? You should learn things the way that your skills get transferred from one thing to another. um, Unreal and Unity are just tools, right? They might go away in the next 5 years, but that doesn't mean that you'll stop being a game developer, right? And the same goes for web technologies. There's a new web technology coming up pretty much every day. 5 years back, React didn't exist. Facebook launched it, right? 3, 4 years back, Flutter was nowhere in question and Google launched it, right? So that doesn't mean that a React developer is not a web developer, or a web developer who's does not know React is not a web developer, right? So these are all just tools. Treat them as tools. Make sure your knowledge and your skill set translates into things beyond specific tools, right? Um, think of it like, hey, I'm a chef. I use a knife that's this big. Suddenly, I give you a knife that's slightly bigger, and I don't know how to fucking cook anymore, right? Like it doesn't work that way, right? You should be able to adapt and you should be able to grow, and the same things kind of translate irrespective of whether you're coding in C++, Java, C Sharp. Like tomorrow something new will come along. Google created a new language called Go. So those things keep changing and evolving. It's just that your skill needs to adapt to it as well. Okay, I think we're going to just take the last question and then wrap it up. Being any developer, how do you choose between system requirements, performance of the software or game, like choosing between high system requirements or better graphics? Not sure, Atharv, I follow the question. Do you understand this?
Are you asking that like whether you should launch for high-end phones or give users the choice? I'm also not very clear on what the question is. Like, or maybe it's the lowest requirements for your game.
Yeah, I think just mention that lowest part and then we'll wrap up because we're running out of time as well. So
Okay.
so yeah, just share your opinions on that part as well. I think a
Yeah.
lot of devs don't know about it.
So, like it's actually a question of market and business, not really an engineering question, because it really depends on, for example, if you're launching in India and you want to capture the big market, then you would first go with something that's lower end, because most of the devices are lower end right now.
Mm, mm.
Whereas if you're looking to have like better monetization and launch for something that's a premium product, then you would choose different settings. So it's a more of a business and market question, according to me, rather than a technical question.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely right. So normally you'll create systems in a way where you can actually make the entire thing work on high def graphics, low def graphics, and such as well. And also you need to change certain things. So I think like one example was when okay, I think the audience might kill me for this. Is I don't remember whether the Fortnite launched a light version or PUBG launched. It was PUBG that launched a light version recently, right? Yeah, so there in that light version, they have 33 players or 30 players, right?
40, 40
40,
players.
40 players, right? So typically you have 100 players, but then they launched a light version with 40 players, right? So those are typically are the kind of requirements that come in when you're talking from an engineering perspective as to whether you should launch something that supports high-end stuff versus low-end, runs on a low-end device as well, right? And it purely depends. If your primary market is US and Europe, then you probably don't need to worry about these kind of things. But at some point, if you're targeting markets like Asia, where a lot of devices are lower end phones, and even though now lower ends are getting better every day, but they are not every phone is at power of Pixel phones and iPhones, right? So you need to kind of worry about those things. But engineering wise, you should be able to support both. That's how systems are configured. But most of the time, it's a business level decision rather than an engineering decision as to in which area, in which market or region, how you want to implement these things out. Those are usually driven by businesses and executives and such. All right, cool. So let's wrap it up. I think again, thanks for taking out the time today for the detailed conversation. Really appreciate that. Any sort of closing thoughts um, and shout outs?
All good. Thanks for hosting me, and hope all of you had some insight into gaming or what we look for in general. If there are any questions, like, you can reach back to Mayank, and we'll figure out how to answer them later on as well.
Yeah, I think generally the best way would be probably to put any of your questions in our Discord channels. So generally just to join our Discord groups, you can go to outscale.com and we have our Discord invite there. So just join the Discord community of a bunch of developers, both game developers, web developers. So if you have any questions for Ojas, just put them there, put a hashtag Ojas next to it, and I'll just pass those questions on to him as well. Sounds good. All right, cool. So thanks for taking out the time. Yeah, I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
We'll put this up on YouTube as well, so people who might have missed it can watch it later as well. So good.
All right.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Take
Bye.
care, guys. Bye.